Welcome everybody. This webinar is about the second round of the Levelling Up Fund, which opened quite recently. My name's Andrew Laird. I'm the Managing Director of Mutual Ventures. We're a small consultancy that focuses on supporting councils and central government to make public services better, more sustainable and more connected to communities. Our particular expertise in this subject matter is that we work with councils to make levelling up fund bids, and in the first round last year we supported a range of councils and had an 80% success rate of applications being funded against a national average of about around a third. The other thing that we're also doing is for this second round, as well as working with councils to support a bid for the first time, we're also working with a number of councils who are resubmitting after an unsuccessful first round bid, and the idea there being that there might be some tweaks, some areas which need strengthening. And then another area that we are working on is on the Shared Prosperity Fund. So a lot of you who are from councils will know that particularly if you're in a unitary or with a district council, that you will need to prepare an investment plan for the Shared Prosperity Fund. So we're doing some work on that. I'm really pleased today to be joined by Sally Grindrod-Smith. We're just having some technical challenges at the minute trying to get Sally on, but Sally is from West Lindsey Council, and we worked with Sally and the team at West Lindsey last year to develop their successful levelling up bid. So hopefully if we can get Sally on, oh, there's Sally now, excellent. After some, it wouldn't be a proper webinar without some technical difficulties, Sally.
I have no idea what happened there.
No, it's brilliant. You're here now. That's absolutely fantastic. So Sally will have an opportunity later to talk you through her experience of preparing a levelling up bid. So just before that, some little bits of housekeeping. You can submit questions via the Q&A function, and there's no need to take notes or pictures. I will send around the slides that we use, and we're also recording the webinar, so if you want to look back on it. So Sally, do you want to just say a very quick hello there?
Morning everybody, apologies for my lateness there and technical issues. I think we're all sorted now. I'm Sally Grindrod-Smith, Assistant Director of Planning and Regeneration here at West Lindsey District Council.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm going to start with a short presentation on what we know about the Levelling Up Fund Round 2 so far, and then I'm going to hand over to Sally. So let's go into share a screen now. Sally, could you just give me a thumbs up if you can see that? Brilliant, right, so in terms of levelling up then, what do we know? We know that it's a key driving force for the UK government's domestic agenda. It's really what is being talked about, levelling up. And what is that all about? So it's supposed to support regions, cities, towns, communities with both physical and social infrastructure projects. So not just bridges and railways and roads, but also the things that really create the social fabric of a place. The fund total is 4.8 billion, and the first round was completed last year, and out of that 4.8, 1.7 billion has been allocated. Now off that 1.7, I think when the fund was launched, people thought this is all going to be about roads and railways, but actually only 450 million of the 1.7 billion was allocated for transport bids. So that's only 26%. So there's a whole range of very interesting projects which have been funded already. The primary bidding entities are unitary councils, London boroughs and district councils, although for transport bids, county councils can also make a bid, and also combined authorities. So local authorities are able to submit a number of bids, which is determined by the number of MP constituencies that you have. So if you're a particularly large council, like for instance Cornwall, you will be able to submit multiple bids. But if you're a smaller council like West Lindsey and you just have one MP, you can submit one. So it's based like that. Each bid, generally speaking, can be up to 20 million. Now that's 20 million pounds that you ask the government for. You're also expected to put in some match funding, which certainly for the first round was expected to be at least 10%. Something else that they've added in for this second round that wasn't there in the first round was that throughout the whole fund in round 2, they've made provision for just 2 larger culture schemes. So those could be up to 50 million. So if you have a particularly big investment project that you think would be attractive to the fund, and because it's over 20 million, you think maybe we shouldn't apply, then there is provision for a couple of larger culture schemes. And then also transport bids can be up to 50 million as well. But with it being a transport bid, the level of scrutiny, the level of detail that the application has to provide is a lot more. Now, if you're lucky enough to be in a Category 1 council, then you will already have received 125k capacity support funding. With round 2 launching, there have been some councils which have been added to the Category 1 list, so it might be worth checking. If you were Category 2 the last time, there is a chance that you might be bumped up to Category 1 and may get that funding. And that funding is there to support you to develop a really compelling bid. And the final point I would make is that just on this bit is that you can do a package bid. So your bid doesn't just have to be for one thing. It can be for a number of things. Actually, when Sally speaks, you'll understand that the West Lindsey bid was for a number of different things. The important bit is that there has to be a golden thread that runs through everything and links everything. So it could be for a number of different things, but there has to be a link. And then also there is the provision for joint bids across boundaries. So if you are working particularly closely with some neighbouring councils on something, then you can explore a joint bid with them. So the themes for bids in the first round were transport, regeneration and cultural investment, and those have stayed exactly the same. So the bid has to be somewhere in this. So if you think about transport bids, that's things like improvements to public transport. It's for active transport systems like cycling, it's for improvements to bridges, it's for accessibility, and it's for schemes to cut congestion. So those are some examples of what you might think about there. In terms of regeneration and town centre investment, it's things like upgrading community buildings, upgrading building facades, it's looking at community spaces and also leisure facilities. So a whole range of things which you can explore there. And then the final theme is cultural investment, and this is about regenerating, maintaining or creating new cultural assets, so things like museums, arts venues, and really developing those local assets which make a place, which really give it a place its heart and soul. And in terms of the bid structure, this is exactly the same as round 1, and there's certainly plenty of lessons to learn on what makes a good bid, but the bid itself is broken into 3 areas. So the first bit is strategic fit, and that is where you demonstrate how your idea fits with your local priorities, and those are priorities in terms of economic, community, cultural priorities, but you also have to demonstrate how what you're proposing fits with national and regional priorities as well. Quite a key bit of strategic fit is showing that you have support of your local MP. Like I said earlier, this is based around the number of bids you can put in is based around MP constituencies. So support of that MP is quite critical. When we move on to value for money, this is all about demonstrating that as far as the government's concerned, this is a good investment. So if they invest £1, what do they get back? And there are all sorts of tools and techniques which we can use to help you work that out. Tried and tested methods for instance, if you're regenerating a park, how does that impact public health? How does that impact the local economy, etc.? And how do you change that from just a good idea into an actual number? And then the final bit, and this is critical, is around deliverability. So this is about the numbers in the finance. So how much will this cost? What are the cost milestones? What are the dependencies? It's also about commercial considerations. So do you need to partner with anybody? If this is a construction project, how will you procure the people who will actually build whatever it is that you're going to build? And then the final element is the management case, which is, do you have the right people in the council who can manage a project of this size? And also a Gantt chart, as you would expect. So how does this look? What are the dependencies? What time will it take? Can you show that you can get started quickly and that you can complete the project on time? And one of the conditions for this round is that they do expect you to start spending this year, so in 22-23. The final bit I was going to touch on before handing over to Sally is the decision-making process. So once you've done all this, how will your bids actually be assessed? So they will have a gateway pass-fail question, which they haven't stated directly yet, but the last time it was that expenditure had to start last year. So I would expect at least one of the gateway criteria would be that expenditure has to start this year. And bearing in mind, last year decisions were made in the autumn, so I think around the end of October. So you would have to have a plan in place to get some spending done between October and the end of March. Then there will be a more detailed assessment against criteria. So characteristics of place is really what your category is based on. So if you're a category 1 area, you're assessed as having greatest need, category 2 less so, category 3 less so. But we've certainly seen category 2 and 3 bids being awarded funding this time. So just because you're not a category 1 does not mean that you shouldn't bid. Then what they will do is assess against each of the 3 areas, which I've outlined there. So strategic fit, value for money, and deliverability. Now, the final stage of decision making is more subjective. So what they will try to do is ensure a balance across a number of things. So the first being thematic split. So transport, regeneration, culture, geographical split. They certainly don't want to be funding all of the projects in a single area or having the funding overly weighted in one area. They may decide that when they're assessing the bids that they put a higher value on one of the 3 areas, strategic fit, value for money, or deliverability. And they will also consider any other investments that you have within the area. So if you've already had towns funding, for instance, or if you've been successful for other funds as well. And again, none of these are showstoppers. None of these will mean that you won't get funded. It's just trying to paint an overall picture of how the government will make awards. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen there. And Sally, I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks very much. So I've got a few notes to run through. Hi, everybody. Just for those of you that might have missed it, I'm Sally Grindrod-Smith, Assistant Director of Planning and Regeneration here at West Lindsey District Council. We're a small rural district in Lincolnshire. In fact, actually the 17th most sparsely populated area in England. Gainsborough is our administrative town with just over 20,000 people. When details for levelling up round 1 were published in March last year, we found ourselves in category 2, priority category 2, which we felt was quite disappointing, having missed out on previous rounds of funding such as Future High Street Fund and Towns Fund. And for us, a quick analysis of the methodology note clearly demonstrated comparable challenges for West Lindsey, particularly across the data sets relating to economic recovery, growth and regeneration. And interestingly, in this latest round of data sets, we're now in priority category 1. But that's another story and a conversation for us to have about what happened to our missed capacity funding for round 1. With work on the growth and regeneration of Gainsborough already underway, it was obvious for us that we needed to be really ambitious and do our best to put together an outstanding bid to the Levelling Up Fund. And although we are ambitious, we're also very realistic here. And we recognised immediately that in order for us to deliver the best possible bid, we'd need to secure external expertise to support us with particularly our business case development and the bid writing. And by mid-March, we'd worked up a specification for support, and which was responded to by Mutual Ventures. And by the end of March, using emergency decision-making powers, we'd agreed a resourcing strategy and a contract was in place for us to work together. Thriving Gainsborough 24 was our bid for funding, and it focused on the regeneration of Gainsborough Town Centre. This area and the surrounding wards are ranked the most as some of the most deprived in the country, in fact in the top 10. And our bid represented a single project comprising of a range of aligned and coherent interventions, which included the construction of a 4-screen cinema and associated retail and leisure spaces, the redesign and redevelopment of public realm, including new green spaces in the town centre, developing and furthering our work on the historic regeneration of the town centre, including our Townscape Heritage Initiative, refurbishment of the central bus station, including implementation of a wayfinding strategy, and the regeneration of vacant living space above commercial premises in the centre of town. Mutual Ventures supported the council to develop these interventions, and a key part of this process was through our facilitated Theory of Change workshop. Bringing together key colleagues from across the council, we used existing research, reviewed performance data and considered the findings of stakeholder engagement to help identify the significant areas of market failure that we'd be seeking to address through our Levelling Up Fund bid. Once the bid was submitted in summer of last year, we spent some time reflecting on the lessons learned and how we might update our approach should we do something similar in the future. And in terms of what went well, our bid reflected significant thinking and work that was already in place on the town's place-based narrative and the strategy, so our strategic picture was already coming together. It was ready to go and it was understood across the council and with our stakeholders, and our evidence base meant we had the basis of the strategic case in place. Our interventions were relatively well developed and informed by previous work and supported by our Section 151 officer. We tested the assumptions and that we were able to provide confidence in the costs being factored into the value for money model. From quite early on in the process, we developed a clear and compelling and ambitious story, and we used this as the basis of leveraging support from our stakeholders and partners. They came with us through the whole process, which led to a robust package of supporting statements ready for the submission of our bid, and also helped with a fairly smooth process through the council's decision-making governance. We did face challenges though, particularly around lack of data that the council held for specific targets for improvement across elements of sustainability. And it was clear that although we are developing our sustainability narrative, it perhaps wasn't as embedded into our processes as it might have been. And for example, our options appraisals or requirements for interventions weren't that robust in terms of sustainability, and that was definitely something we needed to work on. Although we'd seen great benefit from involving colleagues and particularly our finance business partners through the process, actually our learning was that it would have been better if they'd been involved at an even earlier stage. So right from the Theory of Change process, I think they would have benefited from that understanding and being part of developing the narrative. One of the most important decisions that we did get right was the need for business case development and bid writing support. Our bid was submitted well ahead of the deadline. We ensured adequate time for quality assurance and detailed review by all parties. We identified risks early in the process, and we were able to take key decisions on inclusion or need for more data or more support on certain elements in a timely manner. So we weren't scrabbling around at the last minute trying to get things sorted. In October of last year, towards the end, we learned that our bid was successful and would be funded in full, meaning we have a regeneration programme for Gainsborough totaling just over £18 million, with just over 10 million of that coming from the Levelling Up Fund. And since this time, we've signed a memorandum of understanding with the government and we've commenced a delivery stage. And as Andrew said, one of the key components was achieving spend in the financial year that's just completed, and we've met the targets around that. Alongside details of round 2 of Levelling Up, the white paper also announced the headline requirements of the Shared Prosperity Fund, which will see districts like West Lindsey agree an investment plan with government. Having developed the bid for Levelling Up with Mutual Ventures, we're now working together using a similar methodology to prepare our investment plan, which we're eagerly awaiting further advice for government regarding. And I think the key thing for us is the journey we've been on to develop our Levelling Up Fund bid is now standing us in really good stead, and we're able to use some of the learning from that process to move on to further tasks and opportunities around the Levelling Up agenda for government. So I hope this has been a useful snapshot of some of our learning. Happy to answer any questions if it can be of help to anybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sally. I'm just going to reshare my screen. You mentioned theory of change there, so I was just going to explain very briefly to people what exactly that means. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, we can see that.
Great. So, theory of change, this is a key part of your application. So what they ask you to do, and this is part of the strategic fit, is that they ask you to consider or to kind of show in a very concise way how what you're proposing to do addresses the challenges that you've identified and achieves the outcomes that you have said that you want to achieve. So if you think about it, this is a very basic framework for a theory of change. So you start with your context, and all this is done through workshops where you think about what challenges and failures that you're trying to fix and what the impact of those are. Then, ignoring what you might actually do, the second thing to do is to move to outcomes. So now that you know what those challenges are, what are you trying to actually achieve? And once you have that, that's when you come back to the middle bit and think, right, well, what are our ideas, and do they actually create a link between solving the challenges and creating the future that we really want to see? And I've just got an example here, which Sally will recognize, I think. So one of the examples that we had was, for instance, a lack of evening leisure economy. And what was the impact of that? It's a lack of confidence for business investment, no entry-level jobs for that nighttime economy. There's low aspiration to stay in town. The town emptied during the day. There was also led to a perception of crime in the evening. So that's an example of a challenge. And in terms of an outcome, what you really want instead of all that is for the town centre to be busier, more prosperous, more attractive, certainly an improved perception of space, more local employment and skills opportunities, more pride, and a reduced fear of crime. And in terms of what you do about that, well, I think as Sally suggested, redeveloping a large unused site into a cinema, investment in facade and infrastructure of surrounding units, and the actual impact of that will be, at least that's our business case, will be a wider range of leisure activities in the town, increase the number of visitors, increased spend per head, and increased local employment opportunities. So if you can picture this as a segment of a full theory of change, then that's the sort of thing that they're asking you to do. So hopefully that was helpful. I've got some questions here. There's a couple that have come in, one from Kojo. Thank you very much for those. Your first question was, is it just councils who can apply? In England, Scotland and Wales, yes. In Northern Ireland, other organisations can apply. Unfortunately, I can't, I won't be sharing the list of attendees on this call, but every council in the country has the opportunity to bid. And then your final question, it was a three-part question, was just about cultural investment elements. You've asked if it would be possible for cultural education charities to bid directly. The answer to that, unfortunately, is no, unless you're in Northern Ireland, but you can partner with councils. So, councils can very much engage in a conversation with people. So Sally, a question for you. So when you were bidding for this, and you were one of the kind of pioneer councils in round one, what did you find that was harder or took longer than you were expecting?
Oh, good question. I think we were on message in terms of strategic fit. We knew the narrative and we knew the story we wanted to tell. I think the challenge for us was turning the concept ideas into detailed interventions and ensuring we had the full supporting business case behind those interventions. So we had every cost in place, we had every delivery mechanism, we knew what the procurement strategy was. And then we were able to really clearly articulate what the outcomes and then the outputs would be. So I think it was turning that narrative into a very deliverable case for investment. Actually took us the time to work out the nuts and bolts of how we do that, and then the piece of work to be able to demonstrate the economic benefits, which Paul from your team was instrumental in helping us be able to articulate. It really required that just time and effort and energy getting to the level of detail that was needed to be a quality submission.
I think some of my own reflections were, I think it's probably the most detailed application for funding I've come across. I mean, it is in essence, I wouldn't even say a mini business case, a pretty complete business case that follows the Treasury five case model.
I think the good thing about that is once we were awarded the funding, essentially we were ready to go, and we were able to lift that business case, put it through our governance mechanisms, and we were ready to deliver pretty much straight away. So it's essentially doing all the hard work up front, and then when you get the green light, then you're ready to go. It is a full business case process, and the good thing about that has been actually the funding agreement with government, the memorandum of understanding, has been fairly light touch because we've done the work in advance. Yeah,
and that memorandum of understanding, that's can you just say just a little bit more about what that is and kind of what stage of the process you're now at, having been awarded, inverted commas, your funding last autumn?
Yeah, so we were notified of the funding during October half term actually last year, and then by January the government had worked up what the memorandum of understanding looks like, and really that's a breakdown of everything we included in the bid, right from the delivery plan through to the funding and the profile and the risk assessment. We've now signed that with government, and that will form the basis of our ongoing monitoring. So each quarter we update against the milestones within the memorandum of understanding and the expenditure profile. And then at different points in time, every 6 months, it's looking like we will report on outputs and outcomes back to government. So really the MOU was a translation of the bid document into a template for government to monitor against. And actually it's a fairly simple light touch document that just puts the onus on the council doing what they say they were going to do in the bid. So I think the key thing was get it right in the bid, and then it flows through into your memorandum of understanding.
And actually one thing I didn't mention was a key part of that deliverability bit of the bid is monitoring and evaluation.
Yes.
So you have to be able to set out how you would intend to demonstrate your spending and impact.
And it's really clear that the government is seeing Levelling Up as the flagship programme for developing their data set and intelligence around the impact of the Levelling Up agenda across the country. And there's quite a heavy emphasis on being able to articulate really clearly the benefits of the programme that you're delivering. So there's a lot of work and there's a lot of guidance currently still being issued around what monitoring and evaluation is going to look like. And I think the sense that government are developing that programme with us still from round one, and that will continue to be a big part of what we feed back to them on.
Yes, great. Just got a few questions coming in here. So one from Kim Gutteridge: as charities can't lead a bid, can they be part of a project and be either the major or delivery partner in receipt of funds? Quite similar to Kojo's question. The answer is absolutely yes. As part of these bids, the council has to be the lead bidding entity, but they don't have to do everything themselves, or in fact, they don't even have to do a majority of things themselves. There's a huge I think attraction for councils who want for the bids to be successful to have good local partnerships where they are working with local organisations like charities. So I think the answer to that is definitely yes, and to get started on having conversations with councils. This is a question that you won't know the answer to, Sally. What level of detail do you receive if your bid's unsuccessful? From what I have seen, they obviously don't give you the answers, but the councils that we've spoken to, the feedback's been really helpful in terms of identifying the key weaknesses. So some of the councils we speak to know exactly, for instance, that it's the value for money bit that was weak, and that's where they need to to put effort into. So it's very useful feedback, but it's not so detailed as to give you the answer. Question from Martin Handley: with regards to spending in first year, do you have any guidance on rough percentage of the total amount they expect you to spend? We didn't know that during the application process. Is there anything in the MOU on that?
No, absolutely. To be fair, it's been quite light touch. So I would say an element of spend is required, but for us, it wasn't a significant part. And our expenditure has largely been gearing the programme up to deliver. So getting the necessary project resources in place to do that, committing to some of the contracting for goods and services, that kind of thing. And a small amount of the capital expenditure on actual project work, but mainly getting the project ready to deliver.
Yeah. So Sally, a question for you again. So you're now out of the bidding process and it's real now. You have to actually deliver this. So how have you transitioned from successful bid to actually getting going?
Yeah. So we felt that there was quite a bit of downtime once our bid was submitted in June, and we knew if we were to be successful, we'd have to make that expenditure in the financial year. So once we'd taken breath over the summer, we spent some time working with colleagues from Mutual Ventures on what we called our target operating model. So we split down each of the interventions. We considered project governance and the structure of what we would need in place, particularly around project resources. And we got to work putting the bones of that in place, really, without committing the council to significant expenditure. We did things like drafted all the job descriptions, made sure all the processes were in place in the background. So we spent a lot of time getting ourselves ready to do the delivery, which stood us in good stead, and we have been able to achieve that expenditure in this financial year. So I think it was almost continuing post-bid submission with a view that we were going to be successful, because we were determined that if we were, then there's a lot of work for us to do to get ready to spend. So that also included things like working with our commercial delivery partners to make sure we were keeping all of our legal agreements and all that work on track. So I think it was focusing on that project plan and continuing to push to get ourselves into a position where we were ready to deliver.
Yeah, just coming back to the bidding process, there's a question here to do with MP support, which I will address directly in a bit. But one of the things I was quite impressed by in West Lindsey was, given that MP support is so critical, and I think, everybody knows that MPs talk to ministers in the corridors of power. I think keeping your local MP well briefed, well informed about the bid, and in a sense, tooling up that person to make the case in Westminster, I thought was very impressive and quite important.
Yeah, that's right. So we involved the MP right from the start, and we sort of brought him along with us and gave him some tasks and some key questions, and there were things that we wanted to understand ministers' thinking, particularly because we were in priority 2, and we kind of just wanted an inside understanding of what that was going to mean. And we also wanted to give Sir Edward some key facts and figures and things to have at his fingertips should he have the opportunity to keep the conversation alive with ministers. So we spoke with him every couple of weeks. He was very supportive of the principles. He did give us some challenge and wanted to understand some interventions that were included and were excluded. So quite an open conversation with him. We spent time walking the streets with him so he could see some of the issues, meet some of the partners and the stakeholders in the bid as well, so that when the time came for sign off, we were able to give him, and we were able to develop together a clear message of support to ministers that we felt met the criteria of the bid, and Sir Edward had a good understanding of what was included and what that would mean. So I suppose the legwork paid off, really. At the end of the process, it was quite easy to just call him up and say, right, we're ready for you to put your support in writing to us, and then that came back in a timely way.
Great, thank you. So just to address the question that was submitted, it's regarding MP support. Would appreciate any thoughts on an area that has 1.5 MPs, i.e. one whole and one whose boundary crosses into another. How does that affect the bids we can put in? So I've got a real example of this with a current district council that we're working with. They have exactly this situation where one MP's constituency is entirely within the district, one is partly within the district, and in fact is actually majority in a different district. The way that is shaping up is that the MP who is entirely within the district, they have identified a town and a project that that MP wants to support. The other MP actually wants to support a project for a town that is in the bit of his constituency, which is also in that district. So because they have two MPs providing support for projects, they can submit two bids. If that MP decided that actually the project he or she wanted to support was in the other district, the neighboring district, then it would have been more difficult for them. So it's important to get the MP support. So in your circumstance, if the part of the constituency in your district, if you can identify a really good project there and get that MP support, then absolutely you can put in two bids. And I mean, I think it's fair, it's important to say that you could also put in two bids anyway, but the MP support is really critical, I think. One question from Mike O'Keefe: what would your advice be to organisations such as community interest companies who have some great ideas about regenerating communities to partner up with councils? I mean, the advice would be to absolutely do that, bring forward ideas. Right now, councils will be going through a process, we're supporting a number of them to do it, where they're trying to identify what their ideas are. So you need to find out who in the council is leading on this. Is it a director of regeneration? Is it a director of place? Is it, you know, what's Sally's equivalent in the council which you're addressing, and can you contact them? Can you find out how to get in touch with them? Do you have a connection with the local MP? That's also a good way in. But the conversations are happening now, and I think whatever you can do to get yourself into that conversation as early as possible is really important.
I think from my perspective, there's a real opportunity for community groups, charities, to offer something back to local councils and be a delivery mechanism for some of the priorities of levelling up, whether it's a levelling up fund bid or a shared prosperity fund work stream. I think the benefit to councils of having those partners, those stakeholders around that can do some of that delivery and can also provide some of the evidence and intelligence into the theory of change process is really valuable, because it makes for a better rounded place-based approach to regeneration.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question here about an unsuccessful bid in round one. They met with civil servants, said the bid was very good and should resubmit. Question is, can we use the match funding we identified for early bid within our round two, even if this project has now started? I don't think I've got quite enough information from that question. If you want, if whoever, it's an anonymous attendee, but if you want to email me directly at andrew@mutualventures.co.uk, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. It sounds like if you're, I mean, if the project has already started, you're submitting to do with that project and you're demonstrating that you're already up and running, I think the answer could well be yes, but I'd be very happy to talk to you about that. Sally, I know you've mentioned the Shared Prosperity Fund a few times, and all of these things seem to be happening at the same time. So as well as having put the bid in for the Levelling Up Fund last year, which I'm sure you're glad to have got that out of the way, you know, councils now will be thinking about round two, but then also are being asked to think about putting together an investment plan for the shared prosperity fund. Now, I know that the detail on what that needs to look like wasn't forthcoming from government, and I think they've now missed the deadline in terms of PERDA. So it would be good just to hear what it's going to be like for you to kind of try and get the Levelling Up Fund project underway, as well as putting together an investment plan for the Shared Prosperity Fund.
It's a good question. I don't think we'd envisaged in the district necessarily taken the lead on the Shared Prosperity Fund. It was a bit of a new announcement in the white paper. So nonetheless, we're really keen to get our teeth into this. I suppose we're coming from a fortunate perspective that we allowed for significant delivery resource within our Levelling Up Fund bid. So we knew we'd need a team, a project team, to get on and do the delivery. So we have a programme manager and a project officer and a support officer in place that'll pick up essentially the heavy lifting of the day-to-day Levelling Up Fund programme, which has meant we've been able to focus on getting ourselves ready for the Shared Prosperity Fund. And as I said, we're going to adopt a really similar approach to that of the preparation of our Levelling Up Fund bid. So we're currently in the evidence-based gathering stage, moving into the theory of change, where we're looking at the principles that have been published in the pre-launch guidance on the Shared Prosperity Fund. Throwing the net quite wide, thinking about our challenges, our areas of market failure, and any of the challenges we know we might want to tackle as a district, and with the plan that once the guidance is published, we'll start to refine them down into the investment plan. We're also approaching the point where our corporate plan is due for a refresh. So we see the sort of thorough development of an evidence base and theory of change for shared prosperity aligning really nicely with an opportunity for us to reconsider our corporate priorities, so that essentially what doesn't fit within the Shared Prosperity Fund investment plan may form part of our longer term ambitions around the corporate plan. So we're trying to use our experience of levelling up, get ourselves ready corporately and with our partners and stakeholders for what we think may come in the Shared Prosperity Fund guidance, which we're taking a bit of a punt that that's going to look something like a business case for investment, and getting as much work on that done as we can, ready for what we're expecting to be a summer deadline, really.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And just for anybody who's interested, the Mutual Ventures team are doing a webinar on the 20th of April this month, specifically on the Shared Prosperity Fund. I think when we booked in the webinar, we were expecting more detail to be out, but as Sally was saying, there is enough detail there to get started on your investment plan. It's interesting actually that the Shared Prosperity Fund, unlike the Levelling Up Fund, is not a directly competitive process. So, you know, councils are being allocated pots of money and they will unlock those pots of money through the development of an investment plan. And as Sally says, it's a very similar process to thinking about levelling up funding, where, you know, I would imagine a theory of change essentially forms the central part of that. Just coming back to a couple of the questions on the Q&A sheet, a similar one to before, estimate percentage of funding that needs to be spent in 22-23. They have never said what that has to be. There just has to be some funding. Now within the application, you give an indication of how much funding you think that you can start to spend, and although it's not a specific criteria, they may well look more kindly on bids which can get more money spent within year, but that hasn't been written down anywhere. There's a good question here about the role of the town deal board, which is already in place, and how that might play a role within the Levelling Up Fund and UK Shared Prosperity Fund. I would say that sounds like a really good idea if you've got the right people in there. You know, as part of that deliverability bit of the application, if you can show really strong governance and really strong representation of all the people who you need to be bought in, then there's no need to reinvent the wheel. And if those people are working really well together and are functioning well as a group, then that's a much better situation than trying to invent an entirely new body where everybody has to get used to each other again. Let's see now, questions. There's a question about combined authorities. Can they apply, or does it have to be individual councils? I'm going to double check this. I'm going to ask Sally another question, and while she's answering, I will double check that. My 99% sure thought is that combined authorities can make applications for transport bids, because often they are that leading authority. Sally, reflecting on your experience of making a levelling up fund application, what would you have done? What would you have done differently? Well, what if you were to go back and think, do you know what, that worked out okay, but if we could have done it in a slightly different way, what might we have done?
I think what we learned was the benefit of the process was actually really valuable to us as an organisation. And I think when we set off, we got quite a small, narrow project team working on the bid. And actually we grew that as time went by, and we needed to add expertise and we needed to add different sort of technical disciplines. And I think if we'd started with that slightly wider team and probably cascaded through our organisation a bit more, there would have been more benefit to more individuals and across the organisation than we necessarily got straight away. And how we're doing that slightly differently for the Shared Prosperity Fund is we're involving lots of colleagues from what we call our wider management team here in the district. So our team managers are all part of the theory of change process now. So they're all bringing their own knowledge and evidence and ideas and concepts in at a much earlier stage. And I think we'd kept that quite a small and condensed group initially for levelling up, thinking we had a narrow time frame and we knew we needed to be quite focused. But actually, as we brought people in, their reflections were, oh, it'd been really good to have been in earlier, to have understood some of that thinking and seen that developed. So yeah, hopefully with our work on shared prosperity, organisationally we'll be able to grow more colleagues through that process and engage them earlier in the process. And I think the other point that worked quite well on that, sort of conversely though, is that when we approached our partners and our stakeholders, with our concepts that we developed through theory of change, we had a really coherent story for them. But again, we're going to bring them in slightly earlier into the process and allow them to contribute their evidence and ideas through the theory of change. So I suppose it's the benefit of hindsight, and perhaps having a little bit more time allows us to bring a broader group of stakeholders and our own teams through that process sooner.
Great, thank you. Right, so whilst Sally's been asking that, I have double checked, and combined authorities, including mayoral combined authorities, can bid for transport funding, but the bid has to be 90% transport. So as far as culture, town centre regeneration, that's not something that combined authorities can bid for. I'm going to do one more. There is one more question here on the chat, and then if there are no others, I'm going to give people back 5 or 7 minutes of their day, which I know people appreciate. So the last question on here is that there is one MP constituency which crosses with another council, and the question is, could both councils put in a bid or only one bid? The way the rules are drafted, that MP can endorse one bid. Now, you may have another MP or more than one MP's constituency on your patch, in which case they might support a bid as well. But as far as that one constituency MP is concerned, they can support one bid. So they would have to choose between the two councils which one that they would support. I've got one more question here. Number of bids, is it 2 times 20 million based on our two constituencies, which should go up to 50 million if culture is 90%, plus a transport of up to 50 million, or is it 20 million plus transport 50 million, plus up to 2 times further up to 50 million culture? That's a complicated question. If you have two, if you say, I'm just going to try and simplify this, and if you'd like a more detailed conversation, please do get in touch. It's an anonymous question, but you can drop me an email. If you have a council that has 2 MPs in it, then both bids can be up to 20 million, or if you're lucky enough, or if you have an idea that could be one of the 2 larger cultural bids up to 50 million, then that could be one of them, or it could even be both of them. There's no rule to say that it couldn't, but that would be quite unusual if they put both of those in one place. And then also each of those areas, if they do have the support of the Transport Authority, which is often a combined authority or county council, or in London it's a GLA, then you could also put in a bid for 50 million. But I think the core of the question is, if you've got a couple of MPs, do you have 2 times 20 million? And you know, the answer there is yes. So, right, Sally, I just want to say thank you so much. This is our 4th webinar on levelling up from March last year, and it's your 2nd appearance, so I'm really grateful for your time. I know you're extremely busy. As I said before, I'll be sending out the slides which I used and making the recording available. And my email address is andrew@mutualventures.co.uk if you want to have a conversation about anything specific, or if you want to some help and support, you know, putting in a bid, then please do get in touch. And just as an also a reminder, we'll be putting out some information on the Shared Prosperity Fund webinar that we've got coming up on the 20th of May. So Sally, once more, a huge thank you, and to everybody else, many thanks for your time.